Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so glad you could join us tonight. I'm Jennifer Rockwood. I lead the infrastructure practice at Russell Reynolds Associates. I'm also a member of our board and CEO advisory partners practice. I'm thrilled to be here today to introduce our panelists, PATRICE LOUVET, Jonathan Price, and my colleagues HETTY Pye and MARGOT McShane. PATRICE LOUVET is the CEO of Ralph Lauren Corporation and a member of the board. PATRICE has been leading the iconic lifestyle brand's strategic transformation, digital and direct consumer expansion, and sustainability agenda. PATRICE currently serves on the board of Danone and previously served on the board, or currently serves, on the board of Danone and previously served on the board of Bacardi. Jonathan Price is President and Chief Executive Officer of Teck Resources Limited. He has led the operational transformation, strategic growth of this diversified mining company. Jonathan has lived and worked in 3 continents throughout his leadership tenures with Teck and previously with BHP. HETTY Pye is an expert in CEO succession and development planning. She advises Russell Reynolds clients on these matters. She chairs Russell Reynolds Associates Promotions Board, and she co-founded Russell Reynolds Artemis program. And finally, our moderator, MARGOT McShane. Margot co-leads Russell Reynolds Board and CEO advisory practice. She is also the co-founder of Artemis, along with HETTY. So thank you all very much for being here this evening. We know it's already been a busy week for everybody. So today's session, Closing the CEO Gap, tackles a paradox of modern leadership. As the CEO role continues to evolve in truly complexity and difficulty, the succession pipeline behind CEOs is shrinking. As geopolitical crises, AI-driven technology transformations, and tariff uncertainty make organizational futures near impossible to predict, CEOs are asking an urgent question. When we don't know what tomorrow holds, how can we identify and prepare the right leaders for the future? Our research shows that leadership succession plans are already falling behind and short of meeting these challenges, with less than half of board directors believing their CEO succession plans will succeed. Meanwhile, CEO tenures are hitting record lows amid evolving role demands. Executive leaders' overall interest in assuming the CEO role has dropped significantly in the last 3 years. So with that context to ground us today, we will address 3 critical topics. First, why are current CEO pipelines not as robust as they could be? Second, we'll discuss the business case to be made for asserting that women represent the largest under-leveraged source for future CEO succession leadership. And 3, what can boards start to do now to widen, strengthen, and future-proof their CEO succession benches? And with that, I will hand it over to Margot.
Jennifer. So first, thank you for all of you for being here. Jonathan, I want to congratulate you on one of the most exciting mergers I understand the mining industry has had for a very long time. You've also completed a major transformation. And so I'm curious what you view as the major implications of all of this on future focus, senior talent leadership pipelines.
Firstly, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. It's very clear to see which one of us represents Ralph Lauren and which one of us represents the mining industry by
Thank you very much.
Yes, how stylishly dressed you are, Patrice, and how I look like every other corporate executive in town.
No comment.
Week. Look, I think, you know, the work we're doing with Anglo American, this transformative merger is one element of this, but more generally, I think we are finding ourselves in a world where all companies are thinking about transformation. We are being forced to transform our business models in light of AI. We're being forced to think differently about how we operate internationally, given what's happening from a trade perspective, and I think it has significant implications for how we think about leadership going forward, and perhaps what we valued in the past, maybe around some of these more hierarchical structures of leadership where you're dealing with more certainty in the way that information flows and the speed at which things happen, feels somewhat outdated now. And we need leaders now, first of all, who can work with change, because change is a constant in all of our businesses. And in fact, to stay ahead, you have to be leading change, not just be able to manage change, but leading change. And that's not for everyone. And we need to find those who are able and capable, but more importantly, have the aptitude for that, the desire, the hunger for change, so they can lead their organizations forward. So I think that's critical. Secondly, we're looking for leaders who have this, what you might call a sensing quality. Because there are so many signals in the world right now, and there's a lot of noise, and we all pick up on the strong signals because they're well-defined and we all act on them. It's those leaders that can sense these weak signals that exist in the environment around us and act on those early that are particularly important and insightful within the workforce. So we're looking for those leaders as well. And then thirdly, I think to help with this, we just need leaders who have a breadth of experience. Again, because we're no longer working in this rigid hierarchy, you don't just move up linearly through organizations anymore. If you can find leaders who have crossed industries or at least crossed different functions, leaders who have worked internationally, we will be looking for more and more of those folks. You know, our future business here will be more diversified. We'll operate in more countries than we operate in today. So that international profile, that understanding of international culture as much as anything in terms of how we'll engage with our customers and our investors is going to be more important than the past. So I think we're sort of tearing up some of the old scripts around what we need for leaders, and we're looking for some people who are quite different now.
Interesting. Building off of that, Patrice, you've also led a major transformation very successfully. You're also a very experienced independent director. And with this context in mind, from a different industry's perspective, what do you find most boards get wrong about the fragility, or they underestimate about the fragility of their pipeline of talent? And what do they get wrong often in terms of their perception of the readiness of women CEO succession candidates?
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Quite a strong.
Jonathan, I can recommend a few stores nearby if you're looking to expand your wardrobe. I think there are a few things I would call out in terms of where boards can do a better job. First of all, from a time planning standpoint, time horizon standpoint, I think boards will tend to focus too much on the short-term succession planning. And succession planning really isn't, I mean, I like to think of leadership development more than succession planning, candidly. That's, I think, the most effective way to think about it. And therefore, what's the plan? What's the emergency plan? That is often not defined, so that the very near term is often not defined. Like really, is that the emergency plan?
Yeah.
What's the near term plan? What's the midterm plan? What's the long term plan? I think boards have responsibility to look out 10 years in terms of talent pipeline, and often they focus on much more near term. The other is a little bit what Jonathan mentioned, which is while there's some core skills that will always be relevant around leadership, thinking, collaboration, communication, curiosity. What's required to lead 5 years from now is going to be different than what was required to lead 10 years ago. And it's uncomfortable for boards to think about that because it's not necessarily very well defined. And there's great comfort in just playing the old tapes. And then when it comes to women in particular, our philosophy at Ralph Lauren is pretty simple, actually. We want our leadership team to reflect the makeup of the customers that we serve. Because how can we pretend to be successful around the world with different genders, with different communities, if we don't ourselves understand them intrinsically? 56% of our shoppers are women. Therefore, we have a responsibility for the success of the company to make sure that our leadership reflects that.
Interesting. And then, Hetty, you have been involved in a number of CEO succession processes, and you've had access to inside conversations that others haven't had access to. And I'm curious, building on what Jennifer said about the weak pipelines, what do you attribute this to?
So it's interesting. I feel like I'm in a positive echo chamber from my left to my right, because if I just think what you were just saying around the boardroom, and people tend to see this as indeed succession, and it's a succession event, when in fact it's a process or a system. I'd actually go so far as this executive progression, which even goes back before development in my mind, and the development comes off of the progression. So that's one thing that we see happens a lot or doesn't happen. There's then also, I think both of you are saying, we call it, don't get stuck in the rearview mirror. The competencies that delivered, indeed, as we're all agreeing, best-in-class leadership, particularly of CEOs as well, in the past are not true for today and for tomorrow. So specifically, it's getting really clear on what are these leadership competencies that actually define capability to be able to lead in this change constant, as you described it, environment, Jonathan. Absolutely essential. 3 impediments to change that we see, just as sort of as our observations. First of all, and it goes very much to what you were saying, if you're on the board, we found that 50% of board members say that they have limited visibility and understanding of the capability of the executive team below the CEO. So therefore, how do they know? But yet when they have to ask the question, it's an eye on immediate event. Secondly, the timeline, as we've just discussed, is dangerously short. In fact, only 1 in 10, to your point, boards say that they actually look at least 5 years out from a progression to succession perspective. And then if you're the person involved, why wait? What are you hanging around for? Do you actually know what people are looking for? Is it explained to you? Do you feel that you're in some form of a system that's actually supporting you? So for us, actually, but this gets exciting about the topic, right? Because we are talking about a pipeline squeeze and a talent shortage. But actually, if we change the system, I think we would alleviate that really quite quickly.
Interesting.
Can I pick up on something
Please.
Jonathan said, which I think is critical in terms of recruiting and how to think about succession planning? There's great comfort in promoting managers because managers deliver results consistently, and you obviously want to look at track record of results. As CEOs, you need more than a manager, you need a leader, which is the terminology you used. And I think that difference, because you need someone who can see in the future, can change the game, who has the ability to connect all the dots and bring the organization together. And I think often boards go for the more comfortable option, which is the manager that's delivered consistently, as opposed to the individual who will position this company differently 10 years from now, 15 years from now, because the world will have changed dramatically.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, on that point, I mean, we started Artemis because of, as we were just chatting, only 10% of the world CEOs are women. It's flatlined for decades, and we tried to get underneath it. And it's in the context of it's never been harder to be a CEO. What makes a great CEO is different from the past. It's also when all of our clients want more options, more range, more depth, and they're generally underutilizing half the population, which is women, right? So the whole point is to modernize how we define and develop best-in-class CEOs. And I know this is a little bit off topic, but I'm curious, building off your point that you just made around leadership, how you would think about it differently when you think about the step from manager to leadership in terms of what is really needed that's different now.
Can you change the game? That's the key question for me.
Nice phrase.
Can you change the game? Here's the game you inherited. Here's the game you've played historically.
Yeah.
That is not the game you will need to play and win 5 years from now, because competition will change, consumers will change, geopolitical landscape will change. So for me, the difference between someone who's solid and someone who has great growth potential is a track record of changing the game.
That is do you have a response?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I think in addition, what you need a leader of an organization to do is define the purpose of that organization and set the values, of course, for that organization. And more, we're finding that people are navigating to companies that have a strong purpose that they can believe in. It has to be personal to them, particularly if you want that extra effort out of those individuals, which of course we all do. But I think purpose and values are more important to people now, perhaps, than they were in the workplace 20 or 30 years ago when it was more of a financial transaction with the company that you worked for. It needs to be more than that now, and it's the leader's job not just to work on defining that, but to role model that every day, even in the way decisions are taken through the organization, the way you carry yourself through your retail outlets or through where you're creating and manufacturing the goods, because people will look for those signals as to whether those values are real, and they matter.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, why don't we build off of that, because we work a lot with our Artemis, with the participants. We also do a lot of research on the topic. So can you share a little bit about, is this consistent with the competencies we see?
It is. Your conversation is bearing out the data, right? So interestingly, we run a thing called a Global Leadership Monitor Survey. Yeah. And for the first time, we've seen that there's a higher response in people saying, why am I staying in my organization? It's because it's got a purpose beyond the financial. But then if you build it into the competencies, this is where also Artemis gets really interesting in terms of women CEOs. Because we do have the data on those capabilities that are really now making you a true leader in this very fast-moving world. And they've got some things that go precisely what the two of you are talking about. So this drive for impact, 97% of women leaders that we've spoken to are driven and motivated by impact. And that is a differentiated proportion. There is a direct link in our world and our language between that and what we call multi-systems thinking. And that is exactly where you are going, Jonathan, which is there is this almost ever more complex web of stakeholders, people in your ecosystem, regulators, governments, customers, you name it. And you've got to sift out the noise and work out the things that actually matter, spot the patterns, and be able to change the game. So and we know that women index higher on that, and it is a core critical skill, for example. The other is around followership and coaching and development. We've run a series of surveys, and men and women net out pretty much the same on most of these progressive competencies that we know about. But a couple, as I just mentioned, the first one, women index higher than their male counterparts. And the other is this thing around followership and focus on development. And some of these things we talk about the quieter aspects of leadership that you were kind of going on earlier, Jonathan. And those are around your ability to be vulnerable, a word that sounds potentially weak, but actually allows for more answers to come from the organisation and from your team. And in a world where no one has all the answers, that ability is something that's really significant. So, but the irony is, if we think about it from women CEOs and wannabe CEOs today, is actually some of those capabilities I've just outlined, you're being penalised for them potentially, or scrutinised and certainly criticised. You're getting higher activist involvement, you're getting higher media scrutiny, much more negative kind, when they're in fact exactly the capabilities that we need.
Yeah, and conversely, men actually get penalized for showing vulnerability and empathy often, based on the research we've done. This really, though, the whole purpose of Artemis is to not have women or men fit into an outdated model. It's about creating systemic change and how organizations make decisions on who gets to lead. And so to that point, Patrice, you personally committed Ralph Lauren to the Parity Pledge. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what that is, and also how has that commitment changed the way your organization thinks about high potential CEO candidates?
Sure. And if I could just add one additional point, Hetty, to your comment, as we differentiate genders and think about leadership development, it's a two-way street. The individual needs to own their growth and their development and be overt on their ambition.
Yeah.
And of course, the board needs to manage it, right? And sometimes you'll have individuals who don't necessarily voice their interests.
That's fair.
And I think so, or own the next steps of their development. So I think that's also really important, right? This is a two-way street. Both have a responsibility. The Parity Pledge for us is, again, back to, one, our purpose. Jonathan's point is so right, which is to inspire the dream of a better life through authenticity and timeless style. And that applies first and foremost to our teams and our employees. You want to make sure we're inspiring a dream of a better life to everyone inside the company. And this point around making sure that the makeup of our leadership team reflects the customers that we serve. So the Parity Pledge is to ensure that as we are hiring, we're consistently looking at diverse slates.
Yes.
Which we've historically not done, and our industry isn't necessarily known to do that. And then ultimately to get to a point where our the composition of our leadership reflects the makeup of, precisely the makeup of the customers that we serve.
Got it.
Including from a gender standpoint.
Right, including. Just a quick question on the two-way street. Are you finding women are generally raising their hand and owning that ambition, or do they need to be invited into
I hate to generalize, because that's a dangerous part of this conversation. But I would say, if you force me into an answer, I would say that men will tend to be a lot louder on their ambition than women would. And I have experienced and or heard of many situations where women were offered CEO roles, and their first reaction was, I don't think I'm capable of doing it.
Yeah, I'm not qualified.
And then, I had a board member who had a succession candidate like that. He went back to her and said, I believe you can do this. Think about it. I'll give you 48 hours.
Yes.
She came back, thought about it, took the role, and has been incredibly successful.
Amazing.
But there are a lot of stories like that.
That's
why I want to call out this personal ownership as well. It's not just waiting there to see if the board's going to pick you and develop you. You need to lean in. And
you
own
do.
it as well.
And by the way, you're in a safe zone. This is a tricky conversation. We actually have data that actually supports exactly what you said, that men are more likely to raise their hand than women. But over to you, Jonathan. You made a similar commitment. So Teck joined the UN Women He for She Alliance, and you've been a visible advocate for diverse leadership slates in really a traditionally male-dominated organization, so very different from Ralph. Same question. How has this changed how you, your board, think about leadership pipelines?
Yeah, so sadly, the mining industry is very male-dominated. That wouldn't be a surprise to anybody. But to the way Patrice described that they want to have a workforce that reflects their customers, we want to have a workforce that reflects the communities in which we operate, because mining is a very local business. When you put a mine in the ground, you're there for 30 or 40 years, and you're working closely with those communities. So we work very hard to hire First Nations and Indigenous people to help build capability, but also to ensure their work working in our operations. But critically, of course, if we're not bringing 50% of women into our workforce, then again, we're missing out on a large portion of these communities where we could be better served by creating an environment that is better for them to work in. So I think with the UN Women approach, advocacy is one thing, but allyship is much more important, and it's allyship from males within the organization to help females progress their career in what has been a male-dominated industry. And I hope that doesn't sound patronizing, because it's not intended to be. It's intended to help drive the change in the organization that's required, to attract women into our industry, but more critically to keep them there. Because we can recruit great women into our industry, but sometimes the conditions of working on mine sites, which have been designed for men, simple things, just like the facilities we have on those sites, which are very male-dominated, the uniforms we get people to wear at sites you could have fixed this for us, Patrice, but they are...
This is a business opportunity.
They are shaped for men, and they're not comfortable for women. So there are many things that we need to change the environments at site here. But that really is a case of active allyship from men across the organization to help women. I did a very interesting event recently. I've told Hetty all about this. I ran an underground marathon, and it was underground. It was in a mine in Sweden at 1,200 meters below sea level.
I'll leave that to you.
Fascinating thing to do, to sort of run in the dark for 4 hours. But importantly, I brought with me a lady called Andrea, who works in our Chilean business. She's in part of the environment team at one of our large operations. She's a much better runner than I am. So if anything, she was my ally through this process. But part of that was to demonstrate the strength of women in mining, because they are incredibly powerful. They add great value to our organizations. There was a lot of promotion around this event, and Andrew was at the forefront of that. So the more we can do things together as allies, the stronger we'll be, and the more opportunities we'll create for women in the industry.
Did you have any comment on that, Hetty? No.
I'm pleased I'm not a marathon runner.
Marathon.
Although I would like a new uniform. So, but that aside, I suppose I think we are all starting to coalesce around some things, some really relatable themes. It's not happening so much. I wish that other organisations would have this level of conversation about capability and long-term talent development and progression, as they do perhaps on their capital allocation strategy. You might find yourself in quite a different spot. Because for us, I think if I sort of summarise what we're hearing in this bit of the section of the conversation, is organisations need to start way earlier on these topics than they think they actually do.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting where Patrice was going, who's in the pool and who is not in the pool, and or how can they make sure that they are in the pool. And there are different things. There's some complexity in that, but we've got some perspectives on that. As a board, do you actually are the people that you think may make it over time into CEO roles for your organisation and others, do they actually have an active sponsor? Is that actually happening? Do they have active board mentorship? And actually holding yourselves to account on that. And then whilst I completely concur, this zigzag career, we've started calling it, of dexterity is essential and proving to be really valuable for future CEOs and leaders. There's no substitute there, however, for having as well, for the statistics will still tell you, around some exposure to running a P&L. And here we see also from women leaders, I won't surprise you, that typically you'll go up more of a zigzag functional route. You won't necessarily have been given that P&L. So, and if you think we've done some research recently, and if you look at the TSR track record of people promoted into CEO, they have a 2 times better track record if they've run a line of the business before they were promoted than their counterparts.
Yeah. So, and Patrice, you're going to say something?
That's a very interesting data point.
Yeah.
Especially very relevant for us, actually.
Not the CFO.
One of the things we haven't talked about is the diversity of the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, and I think that's an important factor in the process and in the decision making as well. So that's certainly for us at Ralph Lauren and at Danone has been an important priority. And then I think people need to be open-minded in terms of how the zigzag career path that you talked about. Yes. I was in a conversation recently, we were talking succession candidates, and there was a conversation around CFO. And someone said, well, you can never have in this industry a CFO as the CEO in the retail fashion world. Why not? Right? So we also have paradigms that we need to challenge, because you have to look at the skill set and the experience set, to Jonathan's earlier point, and the diversity of experiences as opposed to what's the role. I had a CEO at P&G who came from the supply chain. Mm-hmm. That's atypical in the consumer goods industry. Generally, it's the marketer that, okay, we did a fantastic job, right? And I think being open-minded in terms of where these people started, what the type of experiences are, and peeling the onion on go beyond the label. What did they demonstrate? What's the skill set that they've truly brought to life? That's what really matters in the decision at the end of the day, not the labels or the roles that they went into.
Yeah. Well, how do you, if someone hasn't had a P&L responsibility, how do you go about identifying if someone has the potential on what they could become, especially if it's not obvious to those around them and they're maybe not 100% bought on they have to be a change agent and forward thinking?
Yeah, I don't know that the skill set needs to be dramatically different between a great CHRO and a great P&L leader, right? Because it's about leadership. Can you envision? Can you empower? Can you enable? Can you energize? Can you execute? My 5 years of leadership.
Yes.
It's about quality of thinking. Can you think strategically? Can you think creatively? Do you have a problem-solving mindset? It's about collaboration. Can you partner with the janitor, with the president? Can you learn and bring the outside in? I think that's as relevant for a CHRO as it is for a P&L leader. So I don't know that there's a completely different criteria when we look at staffing senior leadership positions inside the company. P&L is just a different type of experience that you get. And obviously, if you're going to become CEO, you want to have had the opportunity to engage with these types of responsibilities.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, one thing we will do is, while it's not sort of structural role-based diversification or breadth, we will, sometimes something arises in a business where there is no obvious owner for it. It's coming from the outside, usually it's externally driven, there's been a change in the environment, and you need to deliver a point of view on that. We will give that work to people who often are a long way from this subject matter to see how they run with something that they're not familiar with, how they will engage others, how curious they are about the topic that they've been asked to perform. And typically these will be things of the size that will end up being discussed at the boardroom. So it gives a different leader an opportunity to come in. Yes, they might be the CHRO, but they're not coming in to talk about people and talent today. They're coming in to talk about a review we've done of a complex project that went badly in a certain jurisdiction, which is way outside of their comfort zone perhaps, but often the insights we get from those projects, because they take a very different approach to doing the work, perhaps less technical, less procedural. We perhaps learn more in those instances than we would have otherwise. So it's great for the company, it's great for the individual, and it helps the board, get to know people, because you're right, Hetty, the board tend not to know many leaders very well beyond CEO and CFO, and they get to show up in a different way. And I think it helps inform succession as well, and it just builds new muscle for people.
It's making me think, actually, if I give the room some insights from our knowledge around those leadership competencies that are now starting to differentiate. We actually we revised our leadership model for the first time in 10 years recently. And you don't do that lightly when you're in a leadership business. And what we did was we realized we really wanted to unpick some of these more sort of, you could say ethereal, but seriously important questions around reality of potential and your ability to realize them. And interestingly, where both of you have started to articulate is that overarching leadership point, but it is the intellectual dexterity and curiosity, true self-knowledge rather than purported self-knowledge, and underpinned by this multi-systems thinking that we talked about, resilience, and purpose. Those are things, if I were to take, doesn't matter what industry you're in, if you start thinking about those as some of those criteria you're really doubling down on, I think it'll be a real friend going forward in terms of building a greater range of choice.
Yeah.
I would just say that's the first time I think resilience has been mentioned here, but that is incredibly important for leaders of the future. And I'm not sure how you build resilience. I think you build it through experience and you build it through failure in many cases, and it's how you pick yourself up from those situations. But the world is so complex, so fast moving. As you say, there's activist investors chasing us, there's competitors chasing us, there's governments causing chaos. You can be consumed and dragged down by the complexity of business today. Resilience is a core capability.
Actually, CEO doesn't stand for Chief Executive Officer, it stands for Chief Energy Officer. To Jonathan's point on the ability to have the right level of energy on the right topics, day in, day out, over many, many years.
Yeah. By the way, is this innate with people, or can it be developed?
I think some of it's innate, but I actually think there's a great opportunity for coaching and development and mentoring, as Hetty, you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
I heard something very interesting today in another panel, and they were talking about resilience. And part of it, as I mentioned, comes from failure. The other thing they referenced is that people who, while in high school, work in retail, end up being far more resilient because they have no power or authority in the organisation in which they're working, but they have to deal with the customer and they have to deal with unexpected situations every day. And actually, early in their life, creates this resilience that they take through in their careers. And this company has been able to track that they have more partners there's a 50% higher success rate for people who've worked in retail in early years. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting anecdote.
That is interesting. So Patrice, you mentioned earlier the sort of poor succession planning at the board level is something you've seen more than once. And I'm just curious, especially with the need now for more robust pipelines, what do you think boards most underestimate or overlook in terms of the fragility of their pipeline?
Well, I think sometimes boards don't realize their number one responsibility is actually succession planning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
very
often
true.
boards is like company strategy. It's like, yes, but actually, if you have to pick, number one responsibility is making sure you've got the right leadership over time in the company. So one is taking the role seriously and not delegating it solely to the CHRO or the CEO that's currently in place. The other thing is just making sure you're spending time understanding the talent that's in the company and having an objective perspective on who these people are. That's why, to Jonathan's point, I think the opportunity to bring management, different levels into the boardroom, right? Often management in place is very protective of their teams and they don't want to take any risk, and therefore they don't bring in, so that board members can see the individuals, can ask them questions, can see how they think, can see how they behave. And then I think being personally involved in the development of top talent. So we have a mentoring program at Ralph Lauren where our key succession candidates have board mentors, and the board mentors take that seriously. I don't know that we see that everywhere, and I'm finding that to be very effective. One, it helps the board member understand the business better. Two, board members generally are high caliber and they're great coaches.
Interesting. Do you have any thoughts on the same topic in terms of why you think boards underestimate it and what the weaknesses are?
I think it goes to what Hetty said earlier, is you need to start really early on this, and you need to have a high level of confidence in those people who are those identified successors. And I haven't seen this so much at the CEO level, but at other levels, you have ready now successors in your organization, and somebody leaves, and the answer will be, oh, well, they're not ready yet. And you think, well, why are they sitting in the pipeline with ready now tagged to them? So I don't know if that exists at the board level, but it's something to be really mindful of. If you're going to satisfy yourself that your talent pipeline is in good shape, you need to really test that, because you will be asked the question at some point, and you don't want to suddenly have to find yourself going to market to fill a gap that you didn't know you had.
And you see a lot of situations. I mean, Jonathan is so right. You have to, like, really? Are you sure? Like, really? Are they ready now? There's so many situations of incredible companies who have no emergency plan. Right? There's a few not right now, right? Where I'm sure you probably handling some of these searches where, like, really? You didn't have an emergency candidate?
Yeah.
So you let the CEO go because for a reason or another, and you didn't have a plan?
Right.
And these are serious companies, right? So
No comment. We never see that. By the way, the other sort of thing that we can see boards on when they fall into the trap of is when you have successful CEOs, it can be hard for them to imagine someone else in the role, which is why this future-focused success profile is so important. Do you have a success profile that you update regularly with the board?
we have it, and it's not replicate current profile of CEO in position.
Yeah.
It's much more forward-looking. Around 5 years from the time frame we use is 5 years out. 5 years from now, what do we think the key skill set needs to be? What do we think the experience set needs to be? We engage all the board members on it to make sure everyone's aligned, and then we use that as a filter to think through candidates down the road. The risk is, you're right, in situations where there is successful leadership in place, that people say, well, we should just mirror that.
Yeah.
Right? And I think
Right.
that's a trap, actually,
It's a
because that's
safety.
fine for now, but that may not be the answer for 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah, we find we actually try and get boards to almost suspend their belief, as in, separate out what you know is in front of you and actually just distinguish, purely answer the question. What's the strategy for this business? What are the implications of that strategy for the leaders and the future leaders of this business? And it's not an academic exercise. You obviously then will bring in reality, but really distinguish between those, as well as thinking about the fact that there is some competencies that we've already discussed that you're likely to need on the curiosity, self-awareness, etc., that you're likely going to need, which are going to be the sorts of leadership competencies that will allow you to succeed 5 years, 10 years from now. I think there's also one other thing I'd say is, it is so not static, as you're saying, Jonathan, and none of us, unfortunately, have a crystal ball, however much we might like one, which is there might be one or two scenarios. I mean, if I'm thinking about your organisation, it could have gone right or left. It's decided to go left into a merger. It could have continued going right and remained independent.
Right.
So you've got to think about two angles that might happen, but at least allow yourself, what's the commonality between those? And what are the things that might make it different, but make sure that you're really planning for that.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's the timeline is a big factor, and then we tell clients that because you need more than one person, and part of this exercise is looking not just at the expected candidates, but the unexpected candidates, and then have it be in a galvanizing exercise with the board to align on what that future focus CEO spec looks like, if you will, and then working with those with CEO aspirations to really develop the skill. I think you said purpose was one of the big things. We focus on resilience, and then the third thing is really giving them the confidence that they can take on the jobs that truly exist. That is something we work with a lot of the people that, in Artemis about. Jonathan, let me see here. In capital-intensive industries like yours, boards are meticulous about risk mitigation. And what would it look like if boards treated leadership development with the same level of rigor? And where do you think the biggest gap is today?
Nice question, Margot.
It is. It's a tough one to answer. I mean, I think it goes to a lot of the things we've spoken about today. You have to start very, very early in your pipelines. You have to ensure people are getting the breadth of experiences that they need and that they have, the capabilities that are required as well. And you build that pipeline from lower levels in the organization all the way up ultimately to the CEO role. So I don't think it's anything different. I mean, the things, of course, boards can do is sort of, they trust management, but they should verify. So we will go to see our board periodically, not just to talk about the next level down, but to talk 2 and 3 levels down the organization so they understand that we have healthy pipelines. And that's I think, how you manage the risk. But there's also, there's data involved in this as well. See how many times when someone has left the organization, that role has been filled by an identified successor, or have you had to go to market to fill that? And if that happens, that should be or can be considered, was there a failure with the talent pipeline here? Or, was there just somebody in the market that was clearly so good for this role and you needed to bring someone in to change things up? You go externally. But the question should be asked.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned before, time and time again, you tag people as being ready now and they're not appointed. And that means you have a problem somewhere in the way you're assessing or preparing talent for that next step.
Yeah, and to your point, timeline, people don't always know when the CEO is going to leave, and people roll in and out of time. So just having that systemic is key. Did you have a comment on that? I don't.
No, I think you're right, though. It's a 1, 3, 5. It could be 10 plus. It may sound like, my gosh, we're trying to do all things all at once. But actually, they are connected dots. But to your point, you have to have a plan according to whatever juncture you find yourself when you're being asked the question, because sometimes you can't plan for the unexpected.
Were you going to say something?
Well, I just think part of the exercise is identifying the candidate. The other really important part of the exercise is to make them ready for the role.
Yes.
Right, and one of the big changes I've found from going from running a P&L to becoming the CEO is the breadth of stakeholders that I had to deal with now all of a sudden. And I don't think I was fully prepared for that. I actually wish, looking back, that my management at the time had spent more time preparing me for that. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, which is, yes, there's the identification of the talent, but there's also really making sure that that individual can hit the ground running on day one, particularly for the new dimension. So running a P&L, you should have demonstrated that before. Okay, interacting with the media, interacting with investors, managing a board. You don't really get to practice that until you're like in the role.
Yes.
So how do you prepare people for that so they can really be effective from day one?
It's so interesting you say that personally, because that's the single biggest critique we get from boards on what they find. They surprise them on the downside that their CEO, when promoted, couldn't do.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well, and they also say they've invested so much time cultivating people, they've minimized the amount of time to onboard them, and that there has to be concerted transition plan, because no one comes into this for the first time with all those skills, despite the training and whatnot. So that, from a time standpoint, is something we also talk about with boards. Were you going to say something, Jonathan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to follow up on your point, Patrice, it is impossible to overstate the size of the step from being, a chief financial officer or a chief operating officer, whatever it might be, to the chief executive officer. It is, the breadth is staggering. The spotlight, the pressure, it is entirely different. So yes, the time you take through a transition to support that person in that new role, and the experiences you can try to give them ahead of time, whether that's engaging with your investors before they're the CEO, engaging with the media, these things that are incredibly high profile, and when they go wrong really badly, really quickly. You can help people with that.
Is that a grimace or a smile?
Yeah, it's a grimace. It's for sure. When I talked about it's good sometimes to make mistakes and fail at things. Well, I might have some experience there. So I think that that step is a huge one, and you need to prepare people accordingly.
So I think we are approaching time. One of the principles of Artemis is backing assumptions with data and insights. It's also recommendations. You can see we have two men on the panel. This is a co-ed exercise. We always want to be recommending boards to raise awareness of things. And perhaps, Hetty, you could finish by distilling down what you've heard today in terms of recommendations on what can actually be done.
For sure. And it's interesting because when Jamie's going to come and close for us, she's going to go on to just where we were going to and when you actually get the job. But if we think about the spirit of Artemis, perhaps that's just a kind of helpful segue as well, because you've talked about insight, we've talked about data, we've talked about lived experience here. Artemis is all about the so what, right? We have now the data, we have the insight. But we can all sit here feeling stimulated, potentially angry, excited, some sort of emotion, but actually the so what is the critical feature, which is where, and thank you to Patrice and Jonathan, to helping bring it out into lived experience. And therefore the so what can I do, and so what does it mean for me or for my organisation? And I think there's some real clarity coming out of this discussion. So it seems to be a no-brainer on, okay, let's get way ahead of this succession question. If you possibly can, don't even call it that, it's progression. And within that, we have our CEO success profile that's future-focused, but it's got flexibility. We've talked about some of the capabilities that's sitting within there. There's also what I would like to call a culture of progression. So it's not about this succession event where we started. It is about everyone is invited to a progression culture, because it is the participants, the existing CEO, the board, everyone is involved in the same conversation until it starts to become more succession to selection. Well, fine, but you've got a progression culture. And then the last thing I'll say is around a building. We've talked about the board building more of a vocal and visible advocacy and support of these of succession and development programs, and being more visible and clear in their direction. Because we have reflected, actually, a psychologist explained to me, they have a concept which is called the familiarity principle. Mm-hmm. And it's really, of course, in today's world where things are a little unnerving and a little unsure, you obviously, we all grip,
just a little.
Try and grip our comfort blanket. Your comfort blanket is probably something you've seen before. Well, given the fact that 9 out of 10 sitting CEOs in today's world are men, no disrespect to them either, but we're also then saying that we're perhaps more likely to repeat history. So it is reframing the question according to the competencies that we know actually truly do differentiate in today's more complicated leadership world. Those are the things to focus on, and that's some of the so what.
Thank you, Hetty. With that, for closing remarks, our wonderful partner, Jamie.
Okay, thank you all for that fantastic discussion, and a special thanks to Jonathan and Patrice for joining us today and being so generous with your time and insight. I think what we've heard today enables us to think about a couple of very practical takeaways. And if we're going to take anything away from the breadth of insights that you've received, let it be these 3 things. One is what Hetty, I think, has really anchored us in, which is ensuring that we treat succession as a system, not an event. So start early, think about planning 5 years out, and make that development visible. And I think Patrice has really challenged us to think about focusing on CEO leadership competencies that are outcomes-based and are future-focused and on what actually makes a great leadership for your organization. And Jonathan, I think you shared some very interesting examples with regards to sustaining leaders once they're appointed. So don't stop with just the system, with just the spec, but really make sure that you're supporting your leaders once they're there, and that you enable them to stay, enable them to be successful, and that you think about using capital and operational investments just as you would onboarding and making your person and CEO successful. So these steps are practical, they're measurable, they're within the board's remit, and they also reflect a simple truth from today's discussion, which is broadening who gets to lead makes organizations more resilient. And with that, we would say that it is clear that we can't build new solutions with old playbooks, or I think as Patrice has said, let's change the game. And so if you all are ready to do that, we would welcome that and would love you to come join us for cocktails next door as well. Thank you.
I'm excited about new uniforms for Teck.
Absolutely.
New uniforms for Teck.